Will. It's okay, I'll have a bit more. I would like to just take the opportunity to thank again and acknowledge Will and Karen's work in getting all this together and everyone in the room. It's a massive achievement that they've done. So on behalf of the board, I would like to just appreciate that. I'm got a little introduction for Stephen, and I won't. So, the Australian Research Alliance for Children and Youth is a national peak organisation which aims to enhance the futures of children and young people in Australia. ARACY's networks drive and support collaborative activity between the academic, policy and practice communities that lead to better uptake of evidence-based activity and improved outcomes for children, Australian children and youth. And we've had great examples of that this morning. ARACY has long recognised the importance of the middle years as a fundamental period for maximising child development, and will establish a new network, the Middle Years Chapter, in 2017 now. As President of Families ACT, I'm delighted that ARACY has chosen the Middle Years Forum as the occasion to launch this network. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome Stephen Bartos, ARACY's Chief Executive Officer, to launch the Middle Years Chapter.
Thank you very much indeed, Mary. I'd also like to acknowledge the First Peoples of this country and the work of their elders, past and present, in custodianship of the land, and pay my respects to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who may be in the audience today. Who here has come across ARACY before? Oh, that's wonderful. Who's never heard of ARACY? Oh, about 4. That's okay. That's all right. That's all right. I'll spend just a few seconds telling you a little bit about ARACY. We're a membership organisation that tries to give children a better life by bringing together researchers, policymakers and practitioners. So we're not researchers ourselves, but a lot of researchers, including Gerry and George, are members of ARACY. We're not government policy people, but government policy people consult with us all the time about what they should be doing to improve lives. We don't do service provision on the ground, but we certainly have a lot of service providers who are members of ARACY and use the information that we try and collect. So basically what we do is we link people. And we do that partly through something called the NEST, an evidence-based action plan, which was developed through consultations with more than 4,000 researchers, practitioners, but also over 1,000 young people themselves. So more than 1,000 people aged 10 to 24 were consulted on it. And the result of that was the identification of the 6 key factors that improve well-being, that are necessary for well-being. I wish I could figure out, if anyone has a good idea on this, tell me afterwards, how I could figure out a diagram that would describe the way in which every single one of these supports every other. It's kind of like a 3-dimensional space framework where everyone's holding hands or something. Because without any one of these, well-being will fall apart. They're all necessary to support the other. And these are that children are loved and safe, free from violence, free from harm. That they have material basics like food, clothing, housing. We heard a lot from Gerry about the importance of food, nutrition. If kids are going hungry, they won't do well. If they go to school, their health outcomes will suffer. Same applies with other dimensions of material basics, like homelessness. Kids without a home will suffer on the rest of the dimensions. The rest of the dimensions are that they're healthy. Basics, like good physical and mental health, that they're learning, that they're participating, that is having a say in society, and that they have a strong sense of culture and identity. Now, here's an interesting question for you. I mentioned that we produced this nest through consultations with more than 4,000 people. On most of these, the experts and the kids agreed on what the priorities were and why these were important. Which of these was the one where there was a big divergence and where the young people themselves said Australia was doing terribly and the adults were pretty complacent? That's brilliant. Participation. Young people themselves, and particularly that middle years group, 10 to 14, felt left out in terms of participation in the decisions about what matters in their lives. And that's in fact important as a determinant, because with good information, kids themselves can make good choices, and it's appallingly patronising to suggest that they can't. There's no good reason why kids shouldn't have the chance to participate in the things that matter to them. We report on this through a report card that's produced every 3 or 4 years. The last one was 2013, so another one is due towards the end of this year, that collates what data we can. As you've already heard this morning, the data is a little bit scant for that age group, 8 to 14, but we get what we can from multiple sources and we look at international comparisons. Interestingly, what the 2013 report showed was that on a number of those nest dimensions, Australia is not doing as well as a majority of OECD, that is, developed countries. We're in roughly the bottom third. Very consistent with the data George was showing us earlier this morning. I mentioned we're a membership organisation. I'm not here to try and encourage you to join up. You can do that if you want by looking at our website. But it's a key strength of ARACY that we bring together all of those members and we encourage networking between them. That's essential to what ARACY does. And we've got a number of formal networks. We've got an early years chapter, which is really very active, gets together a large number of people, led by Barb Wellesley, who's a wonderful advocate for intervention in the very early years. They organise to spread information about the importance of helping kids in those early years. We've got a longitudinal studies network that looks at studies that track kids over the course of their entire life. We've got something called a prevention science network that looks at what programs work. We've got a parent engagement network. They're doing a wonderful thing, and on your tables there are flyers for a national parent engagement conference coming up middle of this year that will have a host of international speakers talking about parent engagement in learning. Now, what's the relevance of having all of these networks to today's events? Brand new network that I'm launching now, the middle years chapter, taking its name from the early years chapter, which will be an online network linking researchers such as George and Gerry, community groups, policymakers, young people themselves, anyone else with an interest. The Smith family is currently going out on a search through their networks to provide the convener for this network, and will be strongly supportive of this, and ARACY will provide the basic underpinning organisations for it. So that network is being formally launched at this event, and it will be open to anyone who's a member of ARACY to participate in that network and get involved. Strongly encourage it. And why? Well, we've heard a lot about why already. The middle years have, until recently, until things like the Lancet Commission, been neglected. The Lancet Commission itself says that these are years that have been previously neglected by policy and by research. So you ask the question, are the 10 to 14-year-olds blissfully happy and therefore we can just let them go their own way, or is it just that they're ignored? And clearly, what you've heard this morning indicates the need for more evidence. Also, a number of you were asking perfectly wonderful questions about, now that we know more about why these middle years are so important, what can we actually do to make them better? The answer that you'll get honestly from people like Gerry and George and me is, we really don't know. We need more evidence. We need to find out. We need to find out what works. We need to evaluate things that are being done on the ground, make sure that they are working, see if we can gather that information about what is working to make a difference in order that we can spread that more widely around the country. It's absolutely essential. So getting more data on that middle years group is fundamental, as you've heard this morning, but also more information about what works to make a difference is going to be a key role for this new network. What works, not necessarily to solve problems, because we don't want to look at this in terms of all of the problems that kids aged 10 to 14 have. Let's look at it instead in a positive way. Look at the opportunities at those ages. How wonderful it can be to help kids be absolutely the best they can in those years. And it's a crucial stage. Look, I've got a model as to how this all works. This isn't data, it's a model. There is data underpinning different elements of what constitutes your life trajectory. And they're all the elements of the nest. Whether you have better health, whether you have better learning, better participation through life. And kids typically will start off in life, go through a life trajectory where they realise more and more opportunities. But some kids start with various different kinds of adversity, whether it is that lack of material needs, whether it is a chronic health problem, whether it is cultural isolation, whatever it might happen to be. And we do know that the pathway to adversity can be highly persistent. But we also know that there are a couple of periods in life where you can make a huge difference. At 0 to 3 years age is a period when kids' brains are changing quite dramatically. The neuroscience tells us this, but it also tells us that they're changing, as people like George have found out much more recently, in that middle years period, that 8 to 14 period. And that's why it represents a second chance to make positive interventions. There's also a third period that people who play around with MRI machines and exciting stuff like that have identified sometime in the early 20s, which is probably less important, but is also a period where the brain goes through some changes. But that 8 to 14 period is absolutely crucial. What we know clearly is the kinds of interventions that can help in that 0 to 3 period. But we also, I think through the Middle Years Network, the Middle Years chapter that's being launched today, will discover far more about what can help lift kids from that disadvantaged pathway up to the advantaged pathway in those middle years. The other thing that intervening in those periods will do is we know that a certain percentage of those who we did intervene for in the early years slip back. We can prevent that happening. The other thing we also know, we don't know exactly how many, need more research, but we also know that there are some kids from relatively good circumstances who will also slip onto that path of disadvantage in that period. How do we make their life outcomes better? So there's I think, a real opportunity through the Middle Years Network to intervene at those periods in order to keep kids off that bottom line onto that high line. Why is it important to intervene for disadvantage? The answer is it's actually the best, most effective way of raising the average of the entire country. Really hard to push that top line a little bit higher. Through effective intervention, you can raise the entire average if you take the people off that bottom line and take them up to the higher level. And that's why intervening for the kids who are experiencing adversity, who are going through hard times, is actually the most cost-effective way in which policymakers, community groups, even parents and families can make a difference in terms of raising the entire average for the country. I'm going to stop there. I had a couple more slides on some of the work that ARACY's done through a report called Better Systems, Better Chances. But I want to just finish with this slide, and that is, these are the two documents that Gerry and George have been talking about this morning. They're key resources for understanding what's going on, and you can find them online. So I strongly recommend that you do that, and or buttonhole George and Gerry towards the end of today to get them to send you both the Australian Children's Wellbeing Project report or the Lancet Commission report. Brilliant documents. They've started to help our understanding, but it's a start. The key thing now is to move on from there to what works, how can we be more effective, where can we prioritise our action, how can we all work together. That's what the new middle years chapter is going to do, and I'm very proud to be able to launch it today here at Families ACT.
Thanks so much. That's fantastic.